Good morning, everyone. We appreciate you taking the time to join today's ATRAM market update. As you all may already know, we are doing something a little different today. Instead of our usual market update, we will be welcoming the Chief Financial Officer of Ayala Corporation, Mr. T.G. Limcaoco. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that you may ask questions throughout the discussion by clicking on the Q&A button on your screen. If you would like to ask a question anonymously, you may do so by choosing the Q&A section as well. We will get to as many questions as we can at the end of the discussion. Additionally, I'd like to let you know that this webinar will be recorded and that copies will be disseminated within the day, as well as posted on all our social media pages. Now to introduce today's interviewer. As ATRAM's head of equities, he oversees the management of domestic equity portfolios, spearheads the development of ATRAM's equity investment process, and periodically shares the firm's outlook on the asset class. However, today, he will take charge of hosting the interview with Mr. Limcaoco. Let me now hand the floor over to Mr. Jun Tarrobago, Jr.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning, and we're very happy to and excited to introduce to you our featured guest this morning. And this is the first episode of our series of webcasts wherein we intend to share with you the conversations we have with the companies that we first study and investigate and eventually invest in, because these are I think conversations we have that are not really brought out in the open, and we'd like to share our process with you and those very interesting and enlightening and enriching conversations we have with people who happen to be decision makers, very important decision makers in the companies that we invest in. And we have one today, and I'm very excited to share that with you. And before we do that, however, might be good to maybe to look at the markets very quickly, and I'll share with you a quick update on the markets. Yeah, so we think essentially the volatility will persist in the domestic equity market. You have the PSEI down about 28% year to date. We have 2020 GDP growth expected to not be growth actually, but to contract this year. We likewise anticipate corporate earnings to decline, corporate earnings growth to drop by about 20% this year. First quarter numbers were out, and so far I think about 75%, about 3/4 of the PSEI has reported, and core income decline for the first quarter was about -14%. Sifting through the noise and uncertainties, however, we think the data, most recent data and data we're hearing, information we're getting left and right, continues to support what we think is a U-shaped economic recovery, which assumes a total lockdown being lifted by June of 2020. It implies, at least based on our preliminary numbers, positive GDP growth starting either the fourth quarter of this year or the first half of 2021. So this scenario, the U-shaped recovery, likewise assumes a rebound in corporate earnings next year to about 25%, from -20% roughly for 2020. This implies fair value for the PSEI of about 7,000 to 7,140. I'm giving that allowance because if and when we decide to downgrade earnings because of worse than expected second quarter, then you probably will see a little bit of a downgrade on 7,140. But as of right now, we have 7,140 target on the index. That's about fair value of about 14 times 2021 PE. And it suggests upside of about 30% from current levels. The road to 30% upside, however, will be paved, as I mentioned earlier, with I believe, some volatility. The long-term upside, though, will continue to be supported by domestic demand recovery, accommodative monetary policy, resumption of the ambitious and aspirational infrastructure spending program of the government, and I think more importantly, ongoing key ongoing structural reforms that we think will be embraced by investors, and these are number one, the lifting of foreign ownership limits. Number two, the prospective lowering of the corporate income tax rate, possibly 500 basis points, and the real estate investment trust law, which I think we are looking at Ayala Ayala land going doing that in June this year. We'll ask TG later if that's still gonna happen. That was my kid, it's Krista, by the way. So under this scenario, market experts suggest, I mean, I've heard it a lot of times, experts suggest hiding in stocks with in defensive sectors such as telecommunications companies and supermarkets for obvious reasons. While this makes sense in the short term, we believe that considering the uncertainties and the fluidity of the situation, the prudent move is simply to watch how things first play out, and in the meantime, invest in stocks that present high quality and deep value, or companies with clear priorities and direction, strong brands and balance sheets, and thus companies best positioned to emerge stronger from the crisis. Um, one key company is Ayala Corporation that fits all of those criteria I mentioned. Ayala Corp has increasingly become a core holding across ATRAM's equity portfolios. Um, Ayala Corp scores very high on our internal management scorecard. At ATRAM, we love using scorecards. We score everything just to give us an idea of where a company or a security stacks against everyone else. It presents a great play on the Philippine economy with leading positions in key sectors, banks, property, telcos, for example, while also having growing interests in businesses that benefit from the emerging economy. So AC also stands to benefit from potential improvements in the regulatory environment. I think what's important is despite all of this, these are all, I think, great factors for an investment or to be invested in something. Ayala Corp still trades at a very steep discount to our, I would believe, conservative net asset value estimate of about 967 pesos per share. That said, we're grateful to have with us today multi-awarded CFO and Managing Director of Ayala Corporation, TG Limcaoco. TG was also former head of BPI Capital, BPI Savings Bank, and Makati Rotary Club West. So, TG, welcome to the webcast. Very happy to have you here. How are you?
Very good, Jun. Thank you, and I'm very happy to be here and you know, to guest with you guys at ATRAM. I have very high regard for ATRAM, and you know, it's amazing the reach of this webcast. I've already gotten 3 texts from people saying they're watching, and one of them is actually in New York. So, wow, quite amazing your reach. Congratulations! But happy to be here, Jun.
Thank you, TG. We're ecstatic to have you on our pilot for the podcast featuring guests. But first, I want to ask you, how are you doing? How's the family doing under this ECQ? Are you raring to go into GCQ probably in the next week or so?
Yeah, I think eventually all of us will have to make that decision and say we need to get out of our caves, right? We're no longer cavemen, and I think human beings are social beings, and therefore, you know, there's a risk for going out, but I think, you know, people begin to factor that in and take the appropriate safeguards. And, you know, I think we are social, and I think you need to go out, you need to be out there, engage with other people, and I think that's what will happen. But the family's good. Thank you, Jun.
Oh, great to know the family is good. And yes, definitely, I think it's just a matter of time before that social aspect, we get back to doing things that way. And I'm looking forward to improvements in the way things are going to be done. And I think we'll have a lot of time to talk about that later. But before we go into the little bit more serious stuff, I'm curious, what's on your Netflix list right now, TG?
Well,
anything
yeah,
interesting?
that's amazing. Well, I about a week ago I started The Last Dance. I think I'm the last one in the Philippines to watch it, right? I see it. I think it's #1 in the Philippines for Netflix. I'm a little behind, but it's an amazing show actually, and I realize how old I am because to me, you know, the Bulls were champions just recently, and then watching Last Dance, I realized that was over 20 years ago. Right?
Yep. That was hidden footage over the last 25 years, and finally they got Michael Jordan to agree to they're showing it. So I think a lot of insights there. Yeah, I'm watching that. I just finished the whole season yesterday or the day before, and I particularly like the converging timelines. I'm not sure if you noticed that they would have the last championship season of the Bulls, which was 1998, I think, and on another they would zoom back. They would like intermittently go back from that period into I think 88 up to 93 or 94, and then you would have those parallel stories. It's like watching a Tarantino movie like Pulp Fiction, and then in episode 10, I don't know if is this a spoiler alert?
You're spoiling it a lot, man.
Oh, sorry. In episode 10, I mean, just I'll go this far. In episode 10, they converge, so it's like a Tarantino movie, really. So that's interesting. But aside from watching and liking the Last Dance, you and I have another thing in common, and it's that we actually survived, paid some tuition, and survived and thrived through multiple financial crises. And I hope you don't mind. I stalked you on LinkedIn, and I aside from being president of Rotary, BPI Capital, and BPI Savings before you became CFO and Managing Director of Ayala Corp, you were also president of BZW Securities in the 1990s during the Asian financial crisis. So I'm curious, is there anything you remember which is interesting, or any key takeaways back then?
I think that was a really rough time. I mean, for those who don't know, BZW Securities really was Barclays Bank, was the brokerage arm of Barclays Bank in the Philippines. And believe it or not, I started there April 1997 to open up the office and run their brokerage and investment banking arm. And that was April 1997. July 10, 1997, literally 3 months later, Asian financial crisis hit. September 1997, they sent word that they were closing down the whole Asian operation. And by December, myself and my whole crew, we were out of jobs by December 1997. So it was the shortest job I've ever held. But I think what I remember from there was that to BZW's credit and to Barclays' credit, they took very good care of all of us in the office. They made sure we all landed safely. We got generous payments to make sure that we could tide ourselves over for the next year. And I think that's, while I'll always respect Barclays Bank and BZW for that. I mean, it wasn't for them just about, saving as much money for the company, but they made sure that the people landed safely. Like my assistant then, bless her soul, I mean, she's now passed away, but she landed very well. Many of the traders and salespeople are now senior people in your industry, Jun. And I think we'll all agree that we landed quite well thanks to BZW and Barclays. And I think that's what's key to remember in any crisis. You need to take care of people.
And that's a very important point. I hope we can talk about later. I mean, I'm reserving a little bit of time because that's maybe at the end, because that's, I think, one of the key key topics that we will be talking about today. So yeah, me too. I mean, but mine were a bit more excruciating, I would think. I remember getting back in early 2000s, or was it during the 2008 crisis? I remember getting a stress ulcer. I remember thinking things were doomed forever, and that the job, which was so exciting, was suddenly not so hot, not so fun anymore. And then just suddenly, just like that, I remember also looking back, and that we were already right after that period of difficulty. I remember looking back, and we were actually already then shifted into riding one of the longest bull markets in history. So it's, I would say, pretty interesting. Yeah. So speaking of crisis, we're now in another form of crisis, and we're seeing. We're likely going to see massive, or I won't preempt, but we're going to see disruption happen in different industries. I'm curious, for your key industries, Ayala Corp, what do you think are the key disruptive events for say Ayala Land first? Are there any mega trends you're seeing right now? And then later we can talk about BPI Globe. But curious to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think this whole crisis is showing a change in human behavior. Obviously, it's about self-preservation. It's about confidence in the future. It's about economics because people are losing jobs. And I think many industries will have to rethink the way they do business because it will obviously change. But the question is, to which direction will it change, right? And at Ayala, we're running through these scenarios in our minds as what I call forks in the road, where the industry can go one way, it could go the other way. It's not clear to us which way it's going, but we're making sure that when it becomes clear to us, then we have our action plans in place. It's too late to be thinking about what to do when the vision is clear. So right now we're writing our playbooks and saying, if it goes this way, this is what we'll do. If it goes this way, this is what we'll do. You always talk about when you go through a crisis. I think the first thing in a crisis is you must remember the crisis and learn from it, right? I remember when I was interviewing for one of my first jobs, I used to play the stock market a lot, and the guy interviewing me said, do you make money or do you lose money? And of course, I was trying to get a job. So I said, I make money. I trade very well and I make money. And I said, well, that's a pity because you only learn a lot when you lose money, right? You learn the lessons. It's a tuition that you pay, yeah. Right? And I've always remembered that, right? So, the many crises I've been through, you just bank the lessons, you bank the experience, and you learn from that, and you make sure that experience takes you forward. So here we are in this COVID crisis. You asked about Ayala Land. One of the things we think about Ayala Land is, the malls. The mall business has got to operate very differently, obviously under this social distancing. Clearly, merchants will see a very different kind of demand. Until there's a vaccine, maybe, in-house dining will be very subdued. And, look at our malls. Most of it in the Philippines, malls are really about dining, right? And leisure and recreation. And so we've got to work with our tenants. We've got to work with our merchants there and figure out a way that's workable for both Ayala Land as the landlord, as the mall owner, and the tenants as small businesses, because both of us have to survive, have to get through this. And that's the way. So you think about the mall business. Do you need to change the mall business? You need to think about the way you charge rent today. For many years, and you've seen rents evolve, right? In the beginning, rents used to be about just a fixed rent, and then you went to a fixed plus variable. Is there a new model now so that businesses can thrive? We think about office spaces a lot. Obviously, you're working from home. I think most people listening to this webinar are at home. And clearly, there is a future from work from home. But the question is the Philippines really geared up for that? Many of us live with extended families, and therefore space is precious. Many of us don't really have the advantage to have air-conditioned rooms and to be able to stay in an air-conditioned room 24 hours a day, right? We still need a lot of infrastructure to get our home broadband up to par where, webinar can go very smoothly, because I'm sure at one point in this time, things will mess up in this webinar. Yeah. But so work from home, yeah, it's viable, but can it be really sustained for a long time? And then a major industry is the BPO industry. And as I understand it, many BPOs have to deal with data security. And I know many of the workers are not even allowed to take their phones into the workplace because of data security. So how do you expect them to work from home, right? So even that can't translate. So yes, work from home might reduce demand, but can you really move a lot of people away from the office? And then secondly, when you have social distancing, a BPO typically allocates 6 square meters to an agent, to an employee, right? The guidelines now say it's 1 meter distance, 2 meters distance. So in a radius, right away, that's 9 square meters, right?
Right,
So,
right. So
So
do you
right away,
actually need more office space, or do you need less office space because you have work from home? But then again, because of the social distancing, you need more space to have people. I
and
mean, the
and
same.
and and that's the fork in the road, right? It's not clear, right? That's a fork in the road. So we need a game plan where it says, if we are convinced you need more office space, we have our game plan. We know, right? If we then get convinced that no, work from home can actually take up, right? Because the BPO comes off or whatever reasons, then this is the game plan. But it's too late if you only start trying to figure out a game plan then. So that's what we're doing all across, right? And we talk about what are the other things, like in banking and in Globe, we're seeing a huge spike in the use of e-money and mobile money and the ability to send money over your phone without even touching the bank or even currency, right? At BPI, you know, interbank transfers are up 400% since the crisis
Wow.
started.
This is
400%.
InstaPay, no? TG?
Yeah, this is the InstaPay. Yeah.
Yeah.
But just as long as money's moving from BPI to outside and back in, right? It's up 400%.
Wow.
And I'm sure everyone in this webinar figures out, yeah, that's so obvious, because right, when I need to pay for my masks or, you know, anywhere, it's all electronic money today, right?
Would you are you experiencing capacity issues though? I mean, if the surge is that significant, and for BPI, since you're talking about BPI, what do you think is the biggest disruptive technology or event for the bank? Yeah.
You know, the beauty is at BPI, you know, the management team there decided 3-4 years ago to pour a lot of money in technology. And, you know, I'll be the first to admit that we had some hiccups at BPI, right? But that's part of growing. When you're changing technology and you're ripping out your old platform and putting a new platform, there will be hiccups, and we've apologized for that. But today I can say, you know, the BPI platform is the most stable platform around. The capacity, we've had no capacity constraints at all. So kudos to the team over there for putting that in place. And the you know, they tell me they've gotten more users on the platform this year than the whole year last year, right? It's amazing. And the same can be said for GCash, for Globe, right? Today they're, you know, at GCash, you need to verify the users. It's a simple verification. You need to take a picture of your ID, take a picture of your face, and you get verified. But that is a manual process. There's some agent behind it to make sure it matches. And because of ECQ or MECQ, we don't have enough people doing that. So there's a slight delay. But the number of people who are getting verified, they're being asked to put on the GCash platform as verified users, you know, right after the lockdown started, doubled. And then right after the Makati government said they would give aid to all Makati citizens, Makati Zens, via the GCash platform, it doubled again. So, so it's an amazing platform, and I think that's the wave of the future.
And then you have the national IDs soon. I mean, what's your vision there?
You know,
when do you think that's going to happen? And how does that impact or help?
The national ID was, you know, was a law passed 2 years ago and was actually awarded already to a government agency. I think the Philippine Statistics Authority. I think it's very well-meaning. It's a very good idea. I think it gets people to be bankable. If you're on the national ID, it makes it very easy to give you an e-wallet. And I think it's just unfortunate that, you know, in the last 2 years, nothing has really moved. And I understand now that it's under Secretary Carl Chua of the NEDA, who's really committed to trying to get through it. And I asked him, I said, you know, would there be a possibility that, you know, the same way that the Makati Zen, right, the Makati IDs are linked to an e-wallet automatically. I think that's something that Secretary Chua is thinking about very closely. I think he's called for ideas again. And that makes a lot of sense, because it's the way to be able to give aid to people, whether it is SAP like we have now, which I hope never ever needs to happen again in my lifetime. But there are many other forms of social aid that the government does as a regular program. You know, the Pantawid Pasada for jeepney drivers, the conditional cash transfer for mothers who make sure that their children remain in school and are well fed. Those are well served by using, you know, e-money. And as long as you have that platform, then the government's social programs can be executed with zero graft. right? And that's what needs to happen. So we're very supportive of the national ID. I think Secretary Carl will make sure it happens. And when that happens, not only can you have social aid delivered very well, but then also you have the ability now where people can, I wouldn't say tracked, but they can, credit records can be created, which will be a boon to consumer finance, right? Today, the problem banks have with consumer finance is the fact that when TG Limcaoco goes to BPI, BDO has no access to my credit record, so they don't know whether I'm a good payer or a bad payer. And unlike in the developed countries where there are credit bureaus that focus on individuals, we don't have that. We actually have the infrastructure in the Philippines called the National Credit Corporation, I think, but they don't have the data, the credit bureau. But they don't have the data because we don't have a national ID. So you merge the national ID with the National Credit Bureau, which both exist, right? And then all of a sudden, people will have access to credit. This will be so easy. Think about this. Students who cannot afford tuition today will be able to get student loans because they can be tracked, right? So they'll have a national ID. A bank will be willing to give them a student loan to go to college because they know that if they don't pay the student loan when they're employed, they will never get a car loan or a housing loan, right? So people's behavior will change. People will take care of their credit scores, and therefore the benefit to society is very good. I mean, that's been my frustration. I've always wanted to do student loans, but how do you get the student to make sure he pays? He will pay if he knows he can never get a car loan if he doesn't pay, right? And it's okay to let the student pay 4 years after he graduates from college. There's no problem there, but we need an ID system.
Okay. Wow. Pretty impactful. So it doesn't sound like it's actually going to be bad for banks. It's actually going to be good for BPI, for example, once this thing gets unleashed or unlocked. I mean,
yeah, because consumer credit in the Philippines is actually very low for a country of our income stature, right? And it's because many people are unbanked. Many people, there is no national ID. So, and it's quite obvious. That's why all the banks are focused on consumer credit. Now, during this crisis, it will hurt, right? Because many people, their incomes will be reduced. But in the long run, consumer credit is the way to go. Just have to be very careful. You need to be able to score people well. You need to be able to collect well. I have a nice quote that I always use that, Filipinos are very hard to collect money from, right? That's why you never lend your classmate, you never lend your nephew, because it's so hard, right? And even in the banking system, when you have direct debit arrangements, you need to call them and say, please put money in your account so we can debit the account. But I think that all that behavior changes when people are very conscious about their credit score, because credit is a tool for bettering your life. Right? It's a tool for bettering your life.
So it's a tool for inclusive growth, I guess. If we
absolutely,
because I think only 30% of the population have bank accounts.
Yeah,
that was what I heard before. So this helps that. I mean, that inclusion aspect. With regard to yes, did you want to say something?
No, and you push that. A lot of SMEs, and SMEs are really the engine of this country, right? SMEs account for 60% of our employment. And SMEs are really driven by entrepreneurs who will use their personal credit to grow their business, right? When you start a business and you have no income statement to show, a bank will lend you based on your personal, right? And your personal credit. And so a national ID, consumer credit, personal credit translates to better SME credit, translates to better employment. And that's what we need to go for.
Great, thank you for that. Moving over into another related industry of which you are leaders in, Globe Telecom and the telecommunications industry. How does this, is it more of a disruption or is it more of an acceleration of an existing trend already? I mean, I guess we're talking banking and then in financial inclusion and then collection. You talked about collection, payments, and e-commerce. How does this affect? Because before everything, I mean, this event happened, there was a third player coming into the telecommunications market, Dito, I think, China Telecom. And how does this impact that competitive landscape? I'm curious, does it merely push back the entry of the third player, and or are there other scenarios you're looking at? And how are you addressing that in terms of tactical, strategic, and capex?
Well, the crisis has many effects on the telecom industry. First and foremost, the fact that now everyone needs data. It's very clear, right? So data usage has gone through, and what we've seen, for example, in our home broadband product, revenues are when I look at the numbers, the usage of the home broadband product has actually doubled since the start of the crisis. The home broadband prepaid product. What it does, where it's causing a difficulty, is obviously we need to continue to roll out the network and improve the network and build out cell sites. And because of the ECQ, that sort of slowed down, right? Workers aren't able to come in. Permits were harder to get because government offices or local government offices were closed. So, but we're working through that, and I think obviously we will get back on the rhythm. In fact, Globe hasn't changed their capex budget for the year. We expect to continue to spend close to I think 1.2 billion pesos. Sorry, $1.2 billion this year in capex, just to continue to improve and expand the network. From the competitive landscape, I'm not too. I don't know where Ditto is. I think it's always a third player competition is always welcome. It makes the industry more efficient, more competitive. It should result in a better service for everyone as people really gear up the competition. But I'm sure they've also been hurt by the inability to build out. It's been slow, actually. So I think that's where it is. I'm not sure where they are. They've been a bit quiet, but I'm sure they continue to work on their business plans.
Thanks, TG. So now let's shift a little bit into the visions of the new normal, whatever that new normal is. I mean, I was hoping you could give us. You've given us snippets already in what you said earlier, but changes in behavior you mentioned earlier. And then we talked about resulting disruption after. Now let's talk about opportunities. Are there opportunities for business models to shift or change? And how do you see this top of mind? What I'm thinking is with the accelerating shift into the digital space, do you see this as an opportunity? For example, some of your companies that already have links to the new emerging economy, and this is AC Industrials, IMI, Globe, we talked about a bit earlier. Even in logistics, you have All HC, you also have Entrego. I'm curious, what's the playbook here? Are you looking at opportunities there? Here and there?
I think what's clear is that the commerce model will shift, right? The Philippines has been way behind the developed world in terms of e-commerce. And even in the US, I think only 10% of retail is e-commerce, right? In the Philippines, it was barely 1%. And I think many people already use Lazada. Everyone uses Lazada, Shopee, Zalora, right? What's interesting for us is, we own, as a group, we own 49% of Zalora. And Zalora is really just basically fashion. We have a few essentials now, but when the lockdown started, we weren't allowed to deliver anything or sell anything. So we basically closed down. At the end of April, the IATF actually said, okay, e-commerce can take off. And literally overnight, our sales went back to pre-ECQ levels, and now they're 20% above pre-ECQ levels at Zalora. So certainly everyone has made this, has discovered, rediscovered, has become a convert. I've never bought more stuff from Lazada in my life in the last 8 weeks. And I think that's a new normal. I think people have now understand the convenience, and I think people now begin to make the trade-off and say, yes, I'm willing to pay for the delivery fee. Remember at the start, people didn't want to pay the delivery fee, and now people are saying, yeah, I can pay the delivery fee, because when I think about it, the time I spend going there, the parking I have to pay, or the ride I have to pay for, makes up for the delivery fee, the convenience. And I think what this means is that the e-commerce players will have to get a little bit more sophisticated in the way they execute their plan. Wrong orders, misorders, wrong deliveries are a no-no, right? It's a real turnoff. So they've got to get better. I think the logistics space will boom. Logistics capacity will have to build up. We're seeing it in our Entrego operations. Entrego has been very focused only on the last mile delivery for e-commerce. We're needing to put in more and more capacity for that. And that will boom. That will. So that's one exciting part, logistics and transportation. I think transportation models have to change. If we're really going to be focused on social distancing, we need to figure out, can you really pack the trains that way? Or do we have to go through a different model where we're now a little bit more organized, a little more cooperative? I'm hearing that the bus operators along EDSA have now agreed that they will all cooperate and they will work almost like a BRT where they will fall in line, and there will only be 16 stations along EDSA and it'll be very smooth, right? Because, hey, when you can't load the buses, you're just going to have to do more trips, right? To get the same revenues, you're going to have to do more trips. And so you can't be competing. And I think that's what the crisis tells us. In the new model, cooperation is more important than anything else. We talk a lot about good corporates behavior. The traditional model for people like me who grew up in the 80s is shareholder primacy, where the corporation must look out for its profits, and if everyone just looks out for themselves, everything will be fine. Well, this tells us that's not true anymore, right? You need to look out for everyone around you. You need to take care of your employees, you need to take care of your suppliers, you need to take care of your customers, because if any one of them hurts, you will hurt as well.
Right.
And that's how we need to come out of this crisis. We need to all cooperate. And that's why, the banks are giving, even before the BSP said do this payment deferrals, the banks already gave it. And that's why Ayala Land and SM and all the major malls did waive the rentals while it was closed, because you can't go to your tenants and say pay me when they have nothing to pay you with, right? You're just going to push everyone down the hole, and as you push them down the hole, you're going to go with them. So we need to all work together, and as we come out, we need to work on what's a fair way to come out, right? And that's why these new lease models work. We know merchants will not have the same level of sales as they had before. So we need to figure that out, right? But then, everyone has to pay bank loans, because if you don't pay your bank loans, the banks have to be able to pay their depositors, because banks only work with depositors. Right. So there's got to be a fair model. And I think that's the thinking you need to work with. That's the new business model. It's very cooperative rather than competitive.
Not the old capitalist model,
It's modified capitalist,
modified.
right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about supply chain relocation and opportunities for exports and AC Health, which I guess would be very relevant considering this. But you're on a roll, so let's go with that. One of the last topics I was hoping to cover with you was on social responsibility and ESG. Ayala Corp, I think, has stepped up in a big way. If there was any doubt that this is a company that is a blue chip, high quality, and has very high quality management, I think it was all those doubts were put to rest by the way you guys answered the call when the lockdown started. You started I think Project Ugnayan was it, and you also I was impressed by the way I believe it was the very first Zoom call with Mr. Zobel de Ayala, Jaza. He made it very clear the first priority was to protect the employees, and I think that was a very impressive thing he said that just showed me that there was, during times like this, what you need is clarity of thought, and I think it was very clear as to where you guys stood, and what your priorities were, and I just want to commend you guys for that. So back to the question, ESG, social responsibility, because the S of the ESG for those who don't know, pertains to environmental, social, and governance practices of companies that we look at. So it's part of our scoring system, again, scoring for evaluating companies. And you guys actually score high there as well, as per our internal scoring. So could you share with us, I think first, how you were turned into the ESG or social responsibility side, and how do you see it? Your thoughts there, TG. Appreciate that.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, June, right? I mean, a lot of companies now are looking towards, or a lot of investors, to be fair, are looking at the ESG practices of companies, how we treat our environment, how we treat society, and what kind of level of governance do we have. And it's very different from what it used to be in the 80s, where analysts only looked at your profits. Today, there are ESG ratings, and it's what are your social practices. And it took me a while to get attuned to this, because I was trained in the 80s, and I felt that whatever is good for profits would work its way out, work itself. But I think you need to begin to look at companies as I would call living institutions as well. And the role of management of a company is to make sure that the company survives forever. And when I say forever, I really mean forever. Because if you think of your company as something that will disappear in the next 10 years or in the next 20 years, then by definition, when it disappears, the value of the company goes to zero, right? So you need to think very long-term about your company. And that's what attracts me to Ayala, is that we're an institution that's literally been around for 186 years. And it's because they've always felt, the management of Ayala, the owners, have always felt that the survival and the existence of Ayala was tied to the benefit of the country. And I can honestly say this, that when I talk to JAZA and FZA about business, it's always about the business cannot prosper if the Philippines cannot prosper. And we need to take care of everyone around us. And that's why there's this emphasis on employees, there's this emphasis on our customers, our suppliers, taking care of the communities that we work around, and making sure we give our fair share to the government. And if you take care of all these stakeholders, including your shareholders, then you can survive forever. The shareholders provide the capital, the banks provide the debt, the government provides the safety of the community provides you the employees provide you the labor, your suppliers provide you the goods, and your customers provide you your revenues, right? You need to balance all these guys. And sometimes you might have to favor one party over the other because they're weak. So today, de facto, we are taking care of employees and our customers because they are the ones hurting, and our suppliers, they're the ones hurting, right? The community was Project Ugnayan. When the crisis hit, we realized government is well-meaning, but they have a process to go through.
Right.
But
and you raised money there, TG, right? How much did you raise?
Yeah, no, it was sort of a there were like 30 companies, 30 big business groups that came together with us. We raised, I think, 1.8 billion pesos, and working with the Caritas to distribute that, and with ABS-CBN to distribute that. I think we reached 1.5 million families.
Wow.
So that sort of alleviated the pressure in the first 2 weeks, because people do go hungry, right? And then eventually the SAP of the government took over, right? But imagine if the first 2 weeks when people went hungry, we would not be where we are today, right? We would not be where we are today. So you need to take care of the community. And I think that's what ESG is about. And you said it right. Today, there will be greater focus, and in the future, there will be greater focus on the S part, right? I think for the last couple of years, everyone's been focused on the environment. We talk about climate change. What this crisis has taught us is that there's got to be focus on society, right? You need to take care of society. And I think investors looking forward will say that the companies that survive, that will prosper in the future, are those that are good citizens, that know how to take care of their communities and work very well in the communities that they belong to. And to me, that's the thinking that must permeate, and that's the thinking that will define what a successful company is in the future.
My only hope is that the other big companies share the same. I mean, that they are as proactive. I'm sure they're doing their I've heard a lot of other initiatives, but yours is certainly up there for me at least. I could go on and on and on. I have like so many more questions, but I think I need to open the floor up for questions from the group already. And because I did that, I will start with the first question. A colleague of mine asked, are you pushing through with the Ayala Land REIT in June?
Yeah, no, I think you mentioned, I think what Ayala Land is doing, June, to be honest, is in June, they will be launching, or they're working with the SEC today and the bankers. They will try to open the domestic capital markets by doing a 2-year bond in June. So it's just fixed income. It's a 2-year plain vanilla bond. That's the idea, just to get the capital markets going again. What it will prove is that we can work with the SEC all electronically, right? A syndicate can be formed electronically, and we can distribute all working from home. And that's the June target. And I know after Ayala Land, there are other corporates that will follow. The REIT is probably later down the road, towards the end of the year. Obviously, investors will need to see whether rents stabilize, whether what happens to rental demand. But I'm fairly confident it will push through towards the end of the year.
Before I move forward with the other questions, I think we have a guest who wants to ask a question. I think it's Mr. Hagedorn.
Good morning, past President DG. Thank you for joining us today. It's really a pleasure having you. DG, my question is, and it's kind of related. I think one of our colleagues, Randy Rojas, has asked this as well. And bringing us back to our current crisis, can you talk a little bit about the testing that corporates are doing for COVID within your system, how that's being matched with maybe what the government is doing, what cooperation there is going on there, maybe bringing us just back to the now of things.
Sure, past President Phil. As Rotarians, we all call each other past President. And you need to get Randy to join the club. But I
didn't realize we had a Mount Rushmore here of sorts of past presidents. I need to be a president someday or something. But anyway, go ahead, T.
There's a lot of discussion on testing, and let me go through the basics, right? There are 2 kinds of tests today. There's a test called the RT-PCR, which is what everyone calls the gold standard. That's where they take a swab, they shove up a Q-tip up your nose or down your throat, and then they run it through certain machines in labs that have to be biosafety level 2 to see if the RNA of the virus is present in the swab that they took from you. So that's the gold standard. That takes about a couple of hours to run on the machine. So with the logistics from the time they take the swab to bring the swab to a lab, for the lab to actually put it in the queue, run it through the machine, and then get the results and double check, it might take 2 or 3 days for you to get your answer back, right? Unless we really ramp up capacity. Today, the Philippines, when the crisis started, our capacity was probably only 1,000 tests a day. Today, thanks to the work of the government, the IATF, the private sector, the Philippine Red Cross. The Philippine Red Cross has the largest capacity for these tests today. Today, I think we're at about 12,000 tests a day. I think 4 days ago, they were able to run 11,000 results per day. The target of the government is to get up to 30,000 tests a day. And we believe with government and private sector help, that will be achieved, if not by month end, by the middle of June. And that's important because that's the gold standard. The error rate is very low. The accuracy is very high, but it does take a while. The other test that people talk about is what they call the rapid test or rapid test kits, which is where they take a drop of your blood or a blood sample from yourselves, usually a finger prick, put it on a stick, very similar to a pregnancy test. And the stick will tell you within 15 minutes whether you have the presence of two kinds of antibodies, an antibody called IgM and an antibody called IgG. And these antibodies develop as you have the disease. So the IgM develops early into your disease as you're infectious, and the IgG develops towards a later stage and remains with you even after you're cured. So the easy way I remember it is IgM means meron, right? So you have the disease and you might be able to infect someone. And IgG means galing. So you're magaling na, you're not infectious. The issue that we must remember and be cognizant of is that IgM is the first thing that appears. And then as IgM begins to disappear, IgG begins to appear. But IgM only appears maybe 5 days after you get the virus. So in the first 5 days you have the virus, you still don't have IgM. So, and that's why people say the rapid tests are not as efficient, because there's a probability of false negatives where they'll say you have neither antibody when you actually have the virus because you're in the early stage, right? But there is a use for this because when you test people, it's got a fairly high accuracy rate still, and you are able to screen out people who may have it right away, right? So the protocol people follow is if you are IgM positive, you send them for PCR testing, RT-PCR testing, so that it can be confirmed. And I think many corporates will be doing that as people come back to work. They will do a rapid test kit, a rapid test on all of them. And if you are IgM negative and IgG negative, you're assumed to be safe because anyway, you have to come back to work. But at least it will spot the people who are IgM positive and they can go for PCR testing. But once you're IgM positive, whether or not you have your RT-PCR results, you will be quarantined because you're right away suspect. And really what it is to give comfort to the other people in the workplace. And it's also to be able to spot people who might be asymptomatic, right? If you're asymptomatic, they'll assume you're safe. So might as well do a test that might be able to catch you. And so it's not perfect, but it's better than not doing anything. And it reduces the probability of the spread happening within the workplace. So I think that's what many corporates are doing.
Thank you for that. We have a question from one of the attendees. Well, it's on Ayala land. Ali's debt to equity is quite high. How are you guys now mitigating this risk? And are foreign creditors more lenient now? Is the conglomerate affiliation going to play a role on this risk? So that's from the floor.
Yeah, no, I think the debt to equity of Ali is like, I think at the end of the year at 0.8 or 0.79, which is what 2019 is where they ended. And I think that's spot on the budget and our plans, right? Now with this crisis, Toti Bengson, their CFO, has decided with working with Bobby D that one of their strategies this year is to make sure they come out of the year with no incremental debt. So the amount of debt that they had at the end of 2019 will not increase despite the severity of this crisis. So what that means is that they will have to postpone CapEx. So they've already announced that the CapEx plan of over 120 billion for the year will now be cut down. It's going to be less than 70 billion. They will slow down certain office and mall projects so that the spend allows them to conserve cash. And those are the types of things that you need to do during a time like this. But the headline number for Ali from a debt perspective is no incremental debt this year. Fortunately, the conglomerate is very strong. We're very well regarded, both overseas and domestically. I have a meeting with all the CFOs and the treasurers every week about our positions, what the banks are talking. And the banking system in the Philippines, in our minds, has become, has normalized. Liquidity is there. There's no angst in the banking community. We've been able to draw from local banks. As a group, we've been able to draw from foreign banks as well. So that's a good sign. I think when foreign banks look at the Philippines, they still see the Philippines as one of the countries that will emerge stronger relative to the other countries. And it's proven by the fact that, the Republic was able to raise debt at a tremendously very good terms. So I think we're in good stead. Liquidity is good domestically. Foreign banks haven't shunned the Philippines yet. And for Ayala Land, their strategy is very clear-cut, and the execution in their minds is very doable. And I think that's what's going to happen.
Thank you, TG. Another question is if you look at Ayala Corp, you have a very unique portfolio of assets in the sense that you have the traditional industries wherein you're leaders, and then you also have growing interests in what you I guess could label as beneficiaries of whatever the emerging new economy is. I guess tying that to our title, which is embracing change. How do you envision that shift from traditional into new economy happening? I mean, I'm wondering if you could paint that
a game plan.
Yeah.
No, I think businesses can only survive if they constantly change, right? You need to constantly look at new business models, whether you develop new products, and so that's something like when you take a look at Ayala Land, how Ayala Land has evolved over the last 60 years. Ayala Land used to be very high end, right? And in the last 20 years, they've gone down to middle market, they've gone to affordable housing, right? And that's changing your product mix. Ayala Corp, we consider ourselves business builders. We're an investment holding company, and therefore, for us to innovate and change means we've got to look at new businesses to invest in, right? So you said it. We have our core. We have Ayala Land, BPI, Globe, which gives us quite a decent amount of dividends that allows us to invest in new businesses. And so we have invested in new businesses, and some of them do really well. For example, Energy, which we started, AC Energy, which we started in 2011, now provides Ayala Corp, 2 billion pesos of dividends every year. And during this crisis, they're going to come out quite well because not only do they have power projects in the Philippines, but they've got power projects around the world. And power is a basic necessity. Sure, demand has come off a little, but they'll do quite well. We've also invested in other businesses where we think there was a clear lack of affordable and accessible, let's say, education or healthcare. That's why we're in both those fields. Those take longer to materialize, but again, you've got to think about why you're in the business and how do you make the business survive. And obviously, if you're in it for charity, that won't survive, right? Because you need to take capital and make sure there's a return on the capital and that capital is reinvested. So the challenge is to make sure we build a model of affordable, profitable healthcare, affordable, profitable education. And that's what we're being very focused on. And there are new business models. The e-commerce model, that's why we invested in Zalora. That's why we invested in e-money, in GCash, in Mint, right? Those are the things that you need to constantly look at. And many of them, they're not overnight successes. You need to work on it. You need to fix the model. You need to adjust to changes. But the commitment is there to commit capital to it and find the solution that makes it profitable and sustainable. I can think of business models that might arise. Logistics, I think, will be very big. I think we talk about e-money all the time, and we in our minds, e-money is either BPI's app or BDO's app or GCash or PayMaya, right? But there are still many uses for that. There are still many holes in the payment system that cannot be addressed by all of these. So for example, Filipinos actually are sigurista. You know, we like kaliwaan, right? We like kaliwaan. I mean kaliwaan as in not cheating on someone, but kaliwaan as in
Understand. Thanks for
you know,
clarifying that.
we exchange, right? And that's why COD is very big. COD is huge in e-commerce. You know, when you order food, it's always COD. When you buy something on Lazada, it's COD. Why, you know, people don't like to pay ahead and not receive the goods? You know, is there a solution for payment when the messenger is there? Why can't the messenger or the delivery boy take a credit card when you're there? Why can't he take a GCash payment when you're right there, right? Why does it have to be cash? So there are many holes that I think people have to work on. You know, we have a great system for our MRT and our LRT with the beep card. Why isn't this rolled out with all our buses and all our jeeps, right? What is preventing the common tao from doing that? Is it access to data? Is it access to cash that I can freely use at any time? Many problems that need to be solved still, but we work on them.
Thank you so much, TG. I'll round up to the last few questions. I think one other question here that's relevant for us in particular, because we're doing our own planning sessions, is from the group. Recently, you've shared with the investment community that the AC group has taken a shorter view of its planning cycle. I think Jaza mentioned 2 months first to watch everything and then take it as, and then there's a schedule for that. What are your thoughts on this? How long or short should the time horizons be these days? And what are certain indicators or economic conditions you're looking at that will make you regain confidence or become more comfortable to shift back to long-term perspective?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess for everyone, you know, what Ayala did, what we did in the Mancom is figure out our planning cycle. Normally we plan in 5-year cycles. And this year, let's say, we'll break it up into 3 different phases. The first phase was only 2 weeks. We gave ourselves 2 weeks to figure out a plan how to bring employees back to work safely. And that's why you know, we studied this rapid test kits, we studied RT-PCR, we figured out what's the lack of the government. You know, we're actually putting up 5, all our QualiMed hospitals will actually have RT-PCR testing capability to support the government and to support private sector needs. But for the first 2 weeks, we figured out how do we bring people back safely into the workplace. So for example, we are testing everyone at BPI, right? BPI never stopped work. The branches were on shifts, but now as they're going to ramp up to be fully open everywhere, everyone will come back to work. Everyone is being tested. All 19 or 20,000 employees will be tested through the rapid test kits. We're testing everyone at IMI who comes into the plant. We're doing the same for Manila Water. Anyone who comes into the office at Globe will be tested. Even at Ayala Corp at Parent, they'll be tested. Ayala Land is working for where the construction will resume. All workers will be tested. So that was the plan. So we're done with the first phase, the first 2 weeks. The next 2 months, as we move from MECQ to GCQ, this is where we're going to observe behavior, right? The issue we have, and I think the whole world has, is no one can predict how the economy will turn out, whether it's a long U or a short U, is because we all know that nothing will go back to normal until there's a vaccine, right? And we don't know when this vaccine will be around. So we need to see what human behavior is in the meantime. And whether this vaccine takes 2 years or 1 year, for the next 1 year or 2 years, human behavior will be very different from what it was last December. And we need to adjust to that. And that's where I'm saying this next 2 months, part of the Ayala phase, is working this thesis, these forks in the road, right? And testing them, right? We're going to observe how are consumers behaving in the malls? How are sales behaving for real estate sales? Believe it or not, I thought our sales would be 0. They're not 0 in Ayala Land. They're not 0. People are still actually buying real estate, putting reservations down, right? We need to understand what is the behavior of data usage. It's interesting in Globe, that once we went into ECQ, data usage moved away from the CBDs into the neighboring areas. There was a spike of usage in the neighboring areas, less in the CBDs, which makes sense because no one's in the CBD, right? What happens then? Do we need to reconfigure our networks to take the load outside? So many of these things we need to test. We need to test, the viability or how big will e-commerce spike. We need to test, as I said, the fork in the road on office spaces. That's what we'll observe. And we're looking at many data points. Every week, we get a report from our different BUs on top-ups, usage, ATM withdrawals, credit card usage, wallet usage, transfers. Because our thesis is, right from the lockdown, the usage fell as people stopped using it, and it's beginning to rise, right? And we will see that inflection point where we say, oh, this is back to normal. When ATM usage goes back to normal, when top-ups go back higher than what they were, because they were on a rise. So can we reattain that rise, go back above? So those are the points we're watching.
Thanks, Lee. Well, on the health side, there's also another school of way of thinking that developing an immunity is actually a strong tool for that also. But I think I see our CEO on the call, Mike Ferrer. So wondering, Mike, would you have a question for TG?
Yeah, ITG.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah, thanks a lot for being with us. We're working overtime a little bit. Sorry, but I'm always interested in the management stories. In events like this, in a crisis like this, and reading a little bit on some articles from McKinsey, etc. As companies move from a survival mode to try to thrive and recover rapidly, one of the things that's talked about is how you make organizations more nimble, having a startup mentality, more entrepreneurial, etc. No? Because I guess you want to recover as quickly as possible, especially for businesses that have been badly hit. So I guess, as CFO, alter ego of the CEO in a company as large as Ayala Corp and as diverse, how do you kind of bring that sense of urgency, agility in this next phase of recovery?
I guess, Mike, it's not something that you can do overnight, right? Successful companies are companies where the culture, where employees are engaged, employees feel that they're empowered with suggestions. And I think, one of the important things that myself as the Chief Sustainability Officer, and I liked your video at the start of the program where you talked about the Sustainable Development Goals. One of the things that we've really pushed within the whole group is to embrace the UN sustainability goals and focus each company on just a small number of goals and make sure employees understand that that is the goal of the company, right? The goal is not to generate profits, right? The goal is to serve some basic need of man, of the community. And by doing that, you will naturally generate profits, right? And if people embrace that and they feel empowered to suggest and develop business results and to critique and push suggestions up, then you have an engaged workforce. Now, prior to, I can really talk about what we've done at AC because it's something that I live every day. From the very beginning, our IT people said, we're getting completely rid of desktops. No one has a desktop. Everyone has a laptop. And you're all required to bring your laptops home every day. Everyone, from the CEO down to the assistants, everyone has a laptop. They're supposed to bring it home. And lo and behold, when we went into lockdown, literally overnight, right? I mean, everyone suspected it, but it was announced Monday on the 15th that you're not coming back to work. We slid right well into our BCP plan because everyone had their laptops at home. Now, the next phase here, as you pointed out, is how do we make sure that people remain engaged and remain tuned into what the company is doing? every Friday, our CEO and COO, Jaime and Fernando, we have what we call virtual Fridays, right? Everyone comes in. It's literally a webcast where they speak what's happening, what we've done over the last week, and there's a Q&A. People can ask questions anonymously, can throw things at what concerns them. I'll give you a good sample. When we started talking about the plan to return to work, the Q&A was filled with a lot of concern from people, like, how do I know I'm safe? What will we do? And a very mundane, what I thought were mundane questions, but to me showed that people are really concerned. We have a security system where you need to touch a pad to get in. Right?
Yeah.
And they said, well, how do we know that's safe? Is someone going to be wiping it all the time? So the quick answer is, okay, we'll just leave the doors open first. Right? So, but there's a lot of pushback because we live with extended families. So people I thought, were young and healthy said, I'm concerned about going back, not for myself, but because I live with my parents who are 65, right, or 70. And so we needed to rethink that again and develop another process and more protocol as to how. And that's the first thing. You need to continue to show your employees that you have sympathy for them, that they matter, and that they're important. Because really, no organization can get anywhere without the employees, right? And then you need to, again, get them engaged, that everything functions, and then ideas begin to prosper. And communication is very key. I mean, Jaime chairs a ManCom meeting. We had it every day. And then as things began to normalize, we've now got it down to twice a week. We cycle up twice a week. We talk about what's going on in the businesses. Very focused on how we're coping still with the crisis, what we're doing from the business perspective and from the community perspective. We get an update from one of our executives who's very plugged in with the government because, like many large companies, we're very active in helping the government figure out protocols here. And we give our suggestions. And I think what's key now is communication. And it's very easy to fall behind because you're at home and, but it's actually quite easy to remain in touch, but you need to be very, very systematic about it.
Thanks, TG.
So thanks, Mike. Wow, that was a blur. It's been an hour already, more than an hour actually. TG, first of all, I wanna recognize you and thank you, and for really for showing up and for being very generous with your insights. It's definitely been enriching for me, and I hope pretty sure for a lot of people on this, and we hope to work with you someday on the SDGs thing. We have our own SDG priorities, and looking forward to working with you maybe later on that. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Jun, Mike, Phil.
Hope we can do another one later on.
Yeah, I just want to end on a positive note, right? This crisis, we will get through this, right? Markets will return to normalcy. It may not be within the next month, but I think people, have to keep in mind investing for your future. We will get through with this with all the fiscal stimulus around the world. Once we get out, returns will be good. The businesses that survive will do really well. And I think that's why people need to do their homework and work with institutions to protect their future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, TG.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, TG. All the
And
best.
happy to do this again.
Absolutely. Part 2. Let's have a part 2.
Round 2.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone,
Bye-bye.
for joining us also. Sorry. One last thing. There is a survey form, I believe, and I'd like to invite everyone to please tell us what you thought about this. And again, thank you for joining us.